What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to basketball. And more importantly, welcome back to our season preview series, the series where we're diving into every single NBA team before the start of the regular season. We're going to talk about just about everything in this video: a team's goals, what their offseason looked like, their roster breakdown, what's their salary cap situation, what kind of assets do they have, what could their rotation look like, everything that you could possibly need to get yourself ready for the start of the season. In this episode, we're covering the Detroit Pistons, which they've had an interesting offseason to say the least, but hey, make sure you guys like, subscribe, and comment. I've responded to every single comment on my YouTube channel up to this point, and I intend to keep on doing so. All right, let's get into it. So we're back here on the preseason preview. Is that what we're calling this? The season preview, preseason preview? I don't know what I've titled this series. We're back on the spreadsheet, all right? This is the spreadsheet that I use to kind of help tell the story, help me narrate everything that happened for this team and that I think could happen, just basically help me articulate everything. If you guys want access to the spreadsheet, pretty simple process. All you have to do is leave a comment below saying, I would like access to the spreadsheet. I will then give you a link to join my Discord. Once you hop in the Discord, shoot me a DM and I'll get you access to the spreadsheet. I've gotten it out to quite a few people already, which is pretty cool. And I would like to give it out to more people because it helps my algorithm and you guys get a fun tool to play with. But anyway, we got the Detroit Pistons today, which, you know, most years this would kind of be a hard one to talk about because it has just been really hard for this team for a long time, right? Like, can we just take like a quick moment of silence? I'm talking 1 second to just put it out there for all the Pistons fans. Okay, that's all y'all get. It's been rough, y'all. Y'all have been one of the worst teams in basketball for a long time now. You've got all these young, interesting players that it's just not really amounting to anything. Questionable free agency and just front office decisions all around constantly. But are we on the way up? Because this offseason actually wasn't bad for this team. It was actually pretty good. And it seems like they're kind of picking a direction. And you know what? Let's start off with talking about that. So last year, the Pistons went 14-68. Not good. Very, very bad. But where does this leave their current status? You know, normally a team that's that bad is kind of rebuilding, and these are the different categories that I have for teams. I've actually got this team in the growing category because they've made enough moves this offseason where it's like, okay, you know what? Maybe we should prioritize trying to grow some of this young talent that we have so we can actually figure out if they're good or not. Because, you know, that just kind of makes sense. Because, you know, obviously this team's got its Cade Cunningham, it's got the Durans, the Ivies, Thompson, right? Like, there's a lot of interesting young guys in this team, but the team has just been in such disarray, and all these young guys don't necessarily complement each other. They haven't had the role players on the team to support these kind of players, so even if they are talented, we can't really tell just because they're out there in such a nonsense scheme with just such nonsense players around them that there's no way to tell what they can or can't do. But now we're at a point where, you know what, I think we're going to be able to tell some things from this team this season. So let's talk about goals. First thing, win some games. Typically when a team is this bad, I'm like, hey, bottom out, go get talent. This team has been bad for a long time. As long as Cade Cunningham's been here, and look, we all know Cade Cunningham, he's probably the best chance they have at having a star player on this team. I think he's incredibly talented. When you lose as much as these guys lose, it starts to become a culture and it starts to become a standard. This is coming from someone that has been in the coaching world. He's seen this stuff. He hears about this stuff all the time. You can't let this continue to happen because these guys get complacent. As much as you want them to be dogs and to just fight through every single game, it becomes the attitude and people get used to losing. You need to start winning games to start developing these guys. So you have to find a way to win some games, do whatever necessary to start winning basketball games right now. Otherwise, you're just wasting the youth. You're wasting these young guys. Second goal, get Cade going, right? And part of that is winning some basketball games, putting some better talent around him, primarily finding spacers, right? And they did a lot of that this offseason. They're like, okay, we got you some shooters, we got you some veterans out there that actually know how to play NBA basketball. Let's see if we can't get Cade Cunningham rolling a bit. The last goal is figure out who else is him, right? I think, like I said, I think we all know that Cade Cunningham is really good. We just don't really get the chance to see it. So who else on this team are worth building around, right? Like you have the Durans, the Ivies, Thompsons, guys like that, right? So who's really worth that time, or who do we need to move on from? Because, you know, like a lot of these guys, they don't naturally fit together and they can be assets in other ways. So we got to start to evaluate, like, okay, who really fits alongside Cade and like the rest of these vets, or just what kind of team are you trying to build? Who can really become something in this league, and kind of start to build from there. But anyway, let's start talking about what their offseason looked like because it was pretty extensive. I think extensive might not have been the best word to describe this. It is a lot, right? There has been a lot of roster overturn, which is good, right? Because I mean, we looked at the record or whatever, right? Not very good. 14 wins, something needed to change. So a couple different categories to cover here. By the way, if you guys haven't seen The rest of like this series, like go back and watch it, like some of the first couple ones, the Celtics Grizzly ones. Those give you a lot of context to other parts of these videos. But we have a couple different categories here when talking about the offseason. We have drafted players, so players that were drafted coming in, pretty self-explanatory. Player departures, players that were like fully on the roster last year that are no longer on the roster, and then players brought in, players that weren't on the roster last year that now are on the roster. And there are a lot of people to cover here. Let's start off with the drafted players. The first one, Ron Holland. This might have been their only blunder of the offseason, and it could still work for them. Here's why. So Ron Holland is an interesting player. If you watched any of my draft analysis videos or anything, we covered Ron Holland pretty extensively. When you look at him, you're like, wow, future basketball talent. That makes a ton of sense. Like 6'6", 6'7", really good athlete, has a pretty decent handle to him, stupid athletic, right? Like, okay, yeah, no, I can see it. Problem is, dude just like doesn't quite understand how to play basketball. He has some of the worst instincts I've seen on the court in a while, and I shouldn't be like that rude about it because he's young and like there's time to grow and everything, but it's rough, right? He's kind of the walking example of like modern players that probably just played too much AAU basketball growing up and just didn't learn the finer parts of the game. So between that, his inability to shoot a basketball, like it just doesn't fit in this team that has all these other guys that kind of fit that category, right? So the pick didn't make a lot of sense. Like I just feel like there was better uses of the pick. Maybe it was trading it, maybe it was something else. It was hard to trade the picks this year, but nonetheless, you have Ron Holland on the team now. What are we going to do with him? We got to develop him somehow. And talent hasn't necessarily developed in this franchise before, so I'm a little bit worried about it. They also drafted Bobby Klintman, who I view him as kind of a raw, like potential stretch big option that's got a little bit of dynamicness to him. Actually looked better in Summer League than he did in a lot of the workouts that I got to see him in during the offseason. So, you know what? We'll see if he turns into anything. I don't expect an immediate results out of him this year, but nonetheless, though, that's kind of what their draft looked like. It's full of a lot of question marks. All right, let's talk about player departures. So Quentin Grimes was somebody that didn't really get to be on this team for very long. We just recently talked about Quentin Grimes in a video with the Dallas Mavericks, as he's on their team now. So go back and watch that if you want to talk about Q Grimes more. His impact on Detroit was very minimal. Came over as a part of that trade as one of the core pieces. They're like, oh, interesting young player, can space the floor, makes some sense to have him next to Cade. Well, they traded him, he's gone now. So there you go. James Wiseman, a part of that just really weird trade that I can't comprehend why it happened. Who was all involved with that? I think it was Gary Payton, Sadiq Bey, and Wiseman, right? Like those were kind of the three player swaps. Sadiq Bey like made sense on this team at the time. You're like, okay, potential stretch forward that can like play a little bit of defense for them. And then they traded him for James Wiseman when like they already had like guys like Duren and stuff kind of in the mix and in the fold, and it's just like, what? And James Wiseman still just looks like a little bit goofy out there. He just looks like he doesn't quite know how to play basketball either. He's gone now. He's not there. You got guys like Chimezi Metu and Taj Gibson who are kind of just reserve forwards for them. It's not really anything more interesting than that, unfortunately. I wish I could give more analysis to it, but it just wasn't. Evan Fournier came over as a part of that Knicks deal as well, got some extra burn, was a veteran presence for them at the very least, but Evan Fournier is still kind of, he's not even signed by a team right now, so again, you're not missing much there. Let's talk about these last couple guys. Malachi Flynn scored 50 points at one point. That was really cool. Who did he get picked up by? The Spurs, I believe. I actually think he's like a quality reserve point guard in the NBA, so I don't hate him. And talking about reserve quality guys, Troy Brown Jr., not great at anything. I dare to say not even necessarily good at everything, just okay at a lot of things. And that's how I describe Troy Brown. And I don't know. I'm not sure if I want to use a roster spot on him, but he's played in a lot of NBA games, so he's got some experience. And then we got Buddy Boeheim, who played less than 100 minutes. So, you know, what are you really going to say? You didn't really lose anything like all that crazy. You lost a lot of names, but it wasn't anything all that crazy. So let's talk about the players they brought in, because these are some actual recognizable NBA names. And yes, this is what their roster was like made up of last year. It's kind of crazy. So the first one brought in was Tobias Harris. Obviously, Tobias Harris had kind of an interesting season last year. Philadelphia fans just wanted him gone. Dude could not buy a bucket in the playoffs. And I don't want to hear these things like, oh, Tobias Harris isn't a good basketball player, yada yada. Tobias Harris is a good basketball player, man. He's been good in the NBA for a long time. He's always been a quality basketball player. People have down points. If we judged everybody by their worst points at all times, I think a lot of us would hate ourselves. So go easy on the dude. He's a good player. He's a hard worker. We all know that. He's really worked himself up in the NBA, and he came here to get a payday, right? The Pistons were the one team that could afford him, and I think their deal to him made a ton of sense. They're like, look, we need vets right now that can come in and at least contribute to winning basketball, Tobias Harris can do that and play that role. So they're like, dude, we got no one else to pay. We'll pay you right now to do it. It's just for a couple years, and that's totally fine. So good for him. They brought in Tim Hardaway Jr. as a part of that Quentin Grimes deal. They kind of just absorbed his contract. And here's the thing, another guy that can get some shots up. Cade Cunningham is a good distributor. If they're going to be playing him at point guard, you can have guys like Tim Hardaway Jr. potentially really excel on a team if you put him in the right system and you give him consistent shots and you get him moving around screens and things like that. We know that he can hit those looks. So you throw Tim Hardaway Jr. out there. Okay, that's a competent player at the very least. Another shot creator and a guy that can be deadly from beyond the arc. Awesome. Love the addition. Add Malik Beasley, who's probably just a better version than Tim Hardaway Jr. at this point in his career. Malik Beasley, weird season last year, right? Because he was just like a torch for Milwaukee last season, just like couldn't miss. And then Doc came in and kind of messed with the rotations. Like him and like Andre Jackson Jr. just like didn't get like a lot of love anymore. I didn't quite understand why. I was like, Beasley should definitely be playing more minutes than he is. He was just such a lethal shooter. And while his defensive numbers weren't like great last season, I mean, the team itself was just kind of in defensive disarray, and so I'm not even sure I can blame him necessarily for that. But again, just quality floor spacer at like the guard/wing spot. It's a great pickup. We go over to B-Ball Paul, a guy that claimed off waivers after Philadelphia didn't retain him. Should just be a decent backup center for them. Obviously, he gets like overpowered due to his lack of size at times, but I think just his rebounding alone can be beneficial. I look like he doesn't have like a great trait overall as like a big man, like something that he really excels in, and that's what you want your role players to be able to do at the end of the day. But I think overall, he's at least like a decent enough NBA player to where he can be satisfactory as a reserve big. And then we just have Wendell Moore here, who he's kind of on the team now. We saw him in Minnesota like a little bit, and he hasn't really gotten a ton of burn. Potentially another like Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr. type player, but we don't see him play very much. I personally am not too high on him myself. That's just me, but he's on the team now, and you know, it's a young player to develop. I don't know. Maybe he ends up getting cut at some point this season. They have the financial space to do so. But regardless, let's go talk about like the roster itself. We'll talk about what kind of assets they have and go from there. This brings me to my favorite tab on this spreadsheet. Those of you that have been following the channel for a while know that this was technically our ideal off-season spreadsheet. It's a little bit different, but very much the same thing at the same time. So with this sheet, we can do a couple of things. We're going to take a look at actual like salary cap figures. We're going to take a look at draft picks and like assets that they have, current roster statuses, what kind of financial situations we're looking like, overall depth charts, and we'll talk about maybe like a potential move or two that the team could make in order to put themselves in a little bit better standing. Let's talk about draft picks first. I feel like that's always a good place to start. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more because why not? No, I'm not. I just kind of make this shit up as I go, y'all. I'm not going to lie to you. Draft pick situation for this team. Let's start off by saying like, look, there are like their own draft picks that they could still get back. I just list whatever picks they like currently have. If they've traded a pick, I have it as gone, but they can get picks back. They just have protections on them. That includes their 2025 pick, right? So just know that that's the case. You look at their like current pool of assets, and honestly for where they're at, I think it's actually pretty good. You see like a lot of second round picks, which is good considering the level of contracts that you have. I imagine like being able to package like a decent amount of these second rounders with like some of these more like mid-level contracts, and you can get yourself maybe a player or two that you want throughout the season if you really need to. And like I'm not really concerned that like they don't have like a plethora of first round picks. They have their own, which is important because they're still probably not going to be great this season. Spoiler alert. Maybe they surprise us, I don't know, but I wouldn't necessarily think so, and I don't think you guys are waiting for me to tell you that they're good. So, but regardless, they've got their own picks, which is great, and they've got a young core already that we need to explore, so I'm not really worried about adding like another big pool of young guys to this. We have to figure out what we have right now and kind of go from there. Let's talk about the salary cap space itself. Again, if you guys want breakdowns on like the different levels of the cap and everything, go watch like the first video or two in this series. I do a much better job of explaining it. But in essence, there's 4 levels to the cap. The salary cap itself, the luxury tax line, the first apron and the second apron. The first and second apron are newer things in the NBA because the NBA doesn't want players moving around a ton, right? They want players to stay where they're at. That's what the league wants. It's better for like retention and viewership and things like that. They don't want star players being traded all the time. So they've put these aprons in place basically to say if you're a really good team and you pay a lot of money, you have to hold on to your team. We're going to make it really hard for you to trade or move players in any capacity unless you're trying to get worse. So that's just kind of something that's put in place. NBA teams are pretty worried about them. They try very hard to avoid them. I think it's a good thing for the league overall. I like the way that the league's kind of operating now, and I think it's a cool level of strategy that they've kind of added to things. So that's just me. You guys can obviously let me know your comments. The Pistons are the only team that have not crossed the cap space line. What do I mean by that? So let's say we added like just another 13 million dollars. Oops, I meant to add one more zero to this. What happened? God dang it. Can y'all just give me one more zero? Thank you very much. So if they had like another $13 million on the salary, this number would go to zero, meaning that they would have crossed the cap line. But yeah, the Pistons are the only team in the NBA, I believe at this point, that find themselves in this situation where they haven't even hit the cap yet, meaning they could still absorb another like just $13 million of nothing. Like they could just take on a player with this much money left right here and not send like a player back even. So kind of crazy that they can do that. Like there's probably going to be a lot of teams trying to battle with the Pistons to try to buy a contract from them or something like that. And so that's an asset that they can use this year in some capacity, because look, like they do have a roster spot left, but there's nobody left that they're paying $13 million to, let alone anything more than a minimum, right? So they have a ton of flexibility to use here, and there's honestly some guys locked up here for a good amount of time, so you shouldn't really have to worry about the cap space too much going forward, which is a good thing for this team, right? Like you're really trying to figure out where you stand with things, but there's a lot of flexibility here. I think you should try to utilize it in some capacity, whether that's getting other assets or other young players or just buying it with something, right? Like we should use this ability because it's just rare in the NBA nowadays. If we go over here and look at the actual like roster itself, we kind of already talked about Tobias Harris a little bit and what he's going to do. Hopefully he's going to provide a little bit of spacing and just leadership on the team. He got a nice 2-year deal, good for him. We already talked about Tim Hardaway Jr. Isaiah Stewart's kind of an interesting one, right? Like he's getting paid this $15 million, and he's an odd player because he's like, okay, is he a 4? Is he a 5? Like we've seen him like try to be a spacer at times, but like it's not really an effective spacing even when he's hitting, because the team still is just so clogged and everybody's kind of like, okay, yeah, like let this dude shoot. Like it's not a big deal if he hits a couple. He's not going to go nuclear on us or anything. So teams would rather just kind of pack the paint on this team. And so you've got this guy that probably should just play center, but he has to play power forward sometimes because of how the roster's been constructed in the past. You're paying him a decent amount of money, and big men are kind of hard to come by nowadays, so I feel like this is an asset that you have to utilize in some capacity. I don't see him as being like a big part of this future by any means. Like, I don't think it's worth holding on to a guy that you're paying $15 million to not even be like the 8th man, maybe. I don't know where I have him in the depth chart necessarily in the rotation here, but like, not going to be playing a ton of minutes. Somebody could use just big man minutes in the NBA nowadays. The backup center pool doesn't look great. Let's find a way to utilize him somehow. We talked about Cade Cunningham. His money's about to go up because he signed the extension, so just know that that's going to happen. Asar Thompson. Now that's a fun one. So Asar Thompson was their rookie last year, one of the Thompson twins. I absolutely love the Thompson twins, and here's why. Because they do everything really, really well except shooting. And I know people on the internet will always want to clown people first for like the one thing that they suck at. We need to appreciate the fact that this is like a 19, 20-year-old kid that played elite defense in the NBA. He was an elite passer. He could get out and run. He was a great athlete, and his rebounding was insane. There was a point last year where like before he got hurt, he was getting you like 10 rebounds a game at his position. I mean, he's like a 2-3. Like that's nuts. And just his sense for the game, him and his brother, that's what baffles me the most, especially considering the upbringing they had, because they were so AAU, and then they were in like the OT league or whatever that was called, the Overtime Elite League, which, let's be honest, they're not teaching them anything complicated or interesting really over there. That's just kind of an entertainment social media league more than anything. But he's come in and he's just shown like, look, I'm not even a good shooter, and I can create space for my team because I know exactly where to fill in when I'm on offense, to where the defense has to watch me because I'm such a threat of getting to the rim or just finding myself in the right place and then being able to just go up and finish over anybody. Like, his sense for the game is so crazy. I'm like, you have to figure out how to develop this guy, and you have to figure out how to make him a core part of this team because he does so many things so well already. Oh, I'd love to coach this guy. I'd absolutely love to coach him. Talked about Ron Holland. He's got a lot of room to grow. I'm a little bit concerned that he's not going to get like the best education here. I mean, I know a lot of Pistons fans will tell me like, oh, well, it's different now. Is this like, we haven't seen it. We haven't seen it yet. We don't know. I hope that they find a way to develop him. I really hope they do, but he's just got a long way to go, and it's not the best group of guys to do it around necessarily, so I'm worried about him, but there's a lot of potential. That's cool. Jaden Ivey, now that's an interesting one, right? Because when Jaden Ivey got picked, I think a lot of us went, huh? Really? Again, Pistons, a lot of questionable moves in the past. So like, well, they just took Cade Cunningham, and now they're going to take this guy who clearly needs the ball in his hands to kind of operate. So how are we going to develop him properly? And that is a fair question, and they haven't figured that out yet. We've seen a lot of good things out of Jaden Ivey. We've just also not seen a high level of things ever. So I'd really like to see Jaden Ivey personally on like another team, but until then, like, let's figure out how to develop this guy and what kind of role does he have. Is he supposed to be a starting caliber player at some point? Like, does he fit next to Cade Cunningham? We don't really know. By the way, he has a team option at the end of this year, and same with Sasser Thompson. Already talked about Paul Reed. Let's talk about Fontecchio. Who was a great pickup from Utah last year, who came in, and the team got a lot better when he got here. Surprise, surprise. They added a veteran who could shoot the basketball and that was going to be aggressive with it. Like, he just kind of was competent and knew what he was doing. All of a sudden, Cade Cunningham's numbers went up, right? The team was just playing better overall. And when you start to play a little bit better winning basketball, you see the guys like the Durans and stuff. And at the time, like Wiseman even like start to show a little bit more of something, a little bit more glimmer of hope because it doesn't look so dreary, right? Great that they brought him back. We talked about Malik Beasley already. Jalen Duren, I love so much. Like, this is a starting center in the NBA and a good one. His talent is out of this world. And now, just listen up with me for a little bit, all right? I need you guys to actually think for just a second with me, because I'm going to say something. You guys are going to disagree with it if you've watched Pistons basketball, all right? Jalen Duren can be a very, very good defender. I know. Hold up. His instincts are very, very, very good. Very good. Effort? No, hasn't been great. Do I blame him? No, because he's like 21 years old and he's been in just crappy situations over and over and over again. Goes to Memphis. If y'all knew what happened at the University of Memphis, the things that go on in that university like I do, you wonder why they don't actually win any basketball games but have all this talent. It is crazy there. He goes to Detroit, loses every night, gets booed off the court. His team doesn't stand a damn chance. He knows he's going to lose every night. Would we like a guy to fight through that? Yes. Do I necessarily expect this like 21-year-old guy to do that? No, I do not. But his talent is really, really high. His ability to go get the ball and be strong and be physical, time rebounds, time defensive stops and everything. When he gets going, it's going, man. And he's a double-double absolute machine. So just be patient. He's young. You need to do something to help him develop. Otherwise, the team failed him. That's what happened at the end of the day. You can be like, yep, he didn't try hard enough, and you know what? Maybe you're right about that. But at the end of the day, the team failed him. Obviously, he has a team option. We also have Marcus Sasser, who was an interesting player coming in at like the point guard position here. Marcus Sasser, we've seen shoot the ball pretty solidly and be another point guard option, but you know, we've got a couple other question marks here, and then he didn't really get to play too much more. So what are we getting out of Sasser? I don't really know. He's got a team option. We talked about Wendell Moore already, same thing, and then Bobby Clintman's the rookie. You have one roster spot still open. They don't necessarily have to use it. Like, this could literally just be a thing where a team kind of pays them to take on a player at some point, and I think that that's a very like viable thing for them to do. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of just what they do. They're like, let's just leave this roster spot open. Somebody's not going to want a player at some point, and they'll just pay us to take him. So that's a breakdown of kind of the roster. Let's talk about the depth chart a little bit. So this is the starting five that I imagine. I'm not necessarily confident this is what gets rolled out day one. So if you in the comments have other ideas, totally open to hearing it. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at all. This is what I would really like to see, and I do think that there's a chance that it happens. Cade Cunningham, that's your guy. He's starting at the point guard, right? I'd like to get Jaden Ivey out there. I don't think I want to, though, and here's why. It's because a guy named Sasser Thompson exists. A guy like Sasser Thompson, I've already talked about how much I like his game and everything. I need to figure out how I can play him next to Cade Cunningham. I need to figure that out, and we need to start figuring it out now. I'm actually curious, like, what their kind of like two-man numbers look like. Well, unfortunately, you look at these two-man combinations, and there really are no positive ones, and that's because the team was really, 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 really bad. So if we look at Cade and Thompson, like, it's kind of middle of the pack. I mean, we could go and look at some of their more like in-depth lineups and everything. Like, what were some of like the positive ones? It's actually when they played Isaiah Stewart with Duren, interestingly enough. Isaiah Stewart and Duren again. That's actually a really interesting correlation. Stewart and Duren again. Interesting. Okay, we're noticing a correlation. Stewart and Bagley. So is Stewart at the 4 like actually something that we need to like observe a little bit closer? Like, because if we take a look at Beef Stew last year, you get the 10 points a game, you get the 38% from 3, 4 attempts. We absolutely take that. But we know that he doesn't necessarily affect the spacing still because guys just kind of want him to take it. So are we actually seeing like a big enough difference with him on the court versus off the court? I know I'm getting distracted a little bit, but this is kind of the point of the videos, right? Is to go into these rabbit holes and figure out what we can find. So on court, there actually are a lot better than with, well, I mean, we just looked at the lineups. We kind of knew that, but plus 7.4 difference. Kind of interesting, right? There's definitely some sort of correlation here, right? What are some of these other ones? So here's where you finally see Thompson with Cunningham and Ivy with Fontecchio and Duren, and that one has a lot of minutes behind it. So that's kind of interesting, and that tells me, okay, Cade and Sasser, that can work, and actually it can work with Ivy, and that's when you throw Fontecchio into the mix, and that's where things started to get pretty good for them at points last season. So that's interesting enough to watch. So I got to keep experimenting because these are my most promising 2 players. I have to figure out how to make them work together. Again, Sasser's there at some point. It'd be nice to figure out how to get him on the court. I just don't know necessarily right now. And then we've got a depth of a couple interesting guys between Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr., who should be good options for this team. Wendell Moore's down there. Again, we saw how good the team is with Fontecchio once they got him. Need him out there on the court. Ron Holland is a reserve. He's going to be growing, and he's the young guy in the team this year, right? Tobias Harris, you're paying him that much money. I have to assume he's going to start in some capacity. You have Isaiah Stewart and Bobby Klintman. We got to figure out what we're doing with Isaiah Stewart. I still, logically, don't know if that makes a ton of sense to have him on the team. I feel like there's just a better use of that contract in that role, but I don't know. If it's working, it's working, and I guess we can try to experiment with it, interestingly enough. And then we got Duren and B-Ball Paul, right? So you got a pretty decent, big man rotation overall between, Stewart, Duren, B-Ball Paul. You don't necessarily have, a towering guy, like an elite shot blocker or anything like that. If you get Duren going, I actually think he probably could be, but nonetheless, it's not bad. So you've got a really interesting depth chart for once on this team. It's just there's a lot of question marks in how good is Cade and Ivy and Sasser, right? And Duren. We got a lot of people that we're familiar with though, and at the very least, there should be enough cohesion on this team by after 20 games or something where you're okay, we got guys that are creating space for Cunningham and stuff like that. And Asar Thompson's roaming without the basketball at all times, helping to create spacing opportunities for these guys. You could throw in the Beasleys and Tim Hardaway Jr.'s for spacing and things like that. And you could have something kind of interesting at some point. So there's a lot of little puzzle pieces on this team. It's just how do they fit together? So what I want to do now is just kind of explore maybe how we could either utilize this cap space in some capacity, or what kind of move can we make to get a little bit of improvement on this team. I don't know who it's going to be yet, and we're not going to reflect it on here. I just always like to do one little trade to kind of talk about it, see if it makes some sense. So that brings us back to Fanspo, where I always like to try to do these kind of interesting deals. And one that I kind of want to explore is the Jaden Ivey one, because I feel like he could kind of be an odd man out and somebody that we could get some value for. And who could we trade him to that could use a point guard? I think there's actually a team that I have in mind already, and it's another really bad team in the Washington Wizards. So the Wizards got an interesting point guard situation right now. They've got Malcolm Brogdon. Interesting enough, right? Do they really need Malcolm Brogdon? Not necessarily, no. But they've also got a guy in Bub Carrington they're trying to develop. And would the Wizards potentially take on a Jaden Ivey? Wouldn't shock me at all. They don't necessarily know what they're doing. So maybe they want to experiment with that in some capacity. So what if we moved Ivy over here? Who are we taking back then? Because my first thought was a Corey Kispert or something like that. Maybe they could take him back in some capacity. Maybe you throw in a Jared Butler or something like that, just because maybe they don't want to pay him over 2 more years still. I don't know. We should be able to just do a trade like that and it kind of works. And I'd rather have a Corey Kispert on this team because he could be more of a long-term fit on this team as a floor spacer. But I don't know. That doesn't excite me a ton. And maybe you're saying you're getting Brogdon back as well, and maybe a pick or something like that. For how high you took this guy, you'd probably want to get a little more. So let's see what else we can come up with. All right, so this is one you guys have probably seen me do in the ideal offseason, and that's just because I find it incredibly interesting, the prospect of this. And just bear with me for a second. Pelicans, they need a big man, right? We have a big man to give you. I know we just talked about how Beef Stew has contributed to this team in actually a positive manner. Just ride with me for just a second, okay? Just ride with me. We throw in an Isaiah Stewart, right? Okay, where do we want to go from there? I'm thinking, where did Ivy go? I can't find him. For whatever reason, he's on the bottom. Let's send him over there. Just what if? What if the Pelicans really don't want Brandon Ingram anymore? Just saying. We bring Brandon Ingram in. This is an opportunity for them to get a high-level basketball talent, right? It doesn't work. They take back Pistons, can only take back. They need to cut another $5 million. Okay, let's just figure out how to make it work really quick. Who can we give another $5 million to? I don't necessarily know. It could be B-Ball Paul. We probably need him as an extra big man on this team, so I don't necessarily think so. Maybe we can throw them a Malik Beasley as well. Why not? Yeah, let's do something like that. Nope, it still doesn't work. Okay, well, let's say it happens later in the year. All right, that's the problem with this. Just hang with me for a second. A move like this, and I'm not saying this move makes a ton of sense. Like, I don't want to pretend like this one's just like perfect or flawless in any capacity because it has its flaws, right? What this would signal to the team is we're trying to win basketball games. And what was one of the first goals that we talked about here? We need to win some basketball games. We need to do that in order to start developing this team and push some of these young guys in the right direction. Bringing in a Brandon Ingram, is that going to win you a championship? No, probably not. But a move like that is, think about like when the Bulls traded for like Nikola Vucevic, and I know that didn't necessarily work out, but at the time that kept guys like a Zach LaVine motivated. They're like, okay, they're trying to build around me. They're trying to do the right thing for me now. Maybe that gets Cade going. Maybe that gets Duren going. Somebody like that. That might be worth it for you, man. Just like, because you could have all this promise in the world, but at what point do these guys like actually start to get going? Would you rather have 6 guys that always had promise or like 2 guys that really actually worked, right? And so that's what I want to try to maximize. That's what I'd be trying to maximize. But regardless, let's start talking about rotations. So this is the rotation that I drew up here. I always put the question mark around it because look, I don't know what it's going to be at the end of the year. This is just an exercise that we would always do as coaches to be like, okay, where do we kind of want players' minutes to work out? Because they could play a lot more some games. It could be a lot less. This is kind of the goal of like the season. Like on a nightly basis, this is kind of where I'd like things to land. Cade Cunningham, want him playing a lot of minutes. Same with Sasser Thompson, right? Fontecchio, Tobias Harris, a little bit older guys, and we've got kind of other guys that can kind of be that veteran, like spacer type guys, so a little bit under 30. We want Duren on the court as much as possible. So probably 30 minutes for the big man. I'd say that's more than fair. We still want to get Ivy on the court because there's still a lot of potential there. I think that makes sense. Then we start to work in some of our shooters like that, like Malik Beasley. I think he's got to play a lot of minutes next to Cunningham. I think there could be a lot of rotations of like Cade, Beasley, Sasser Thompson, either Fontecchio or Tobias Harris with like a Duren or something like that. I think that could be a really, really good lineup for these guys that could actually be pretty deadly to some NBA teams in all honesty. You work in B-Ball Paul, all the minutes that Jalen Duren's not playing, so that turns up to 48 center minutes right there. Tim Hardaway Jr. is kind of just another guard option and shooting option. You're getting Ron Holland on the court as much as you can early on, and probably not more than that. He's got to work his way up from where he's at, and I think that's a fair place. You got Isaiah Stewart that's not currently getting minutes, and I kind of feel like we have to fit him into the rotation now somehow, don't we? Do we need to take away Tim Hardaway Jr.'s minutes? I think that we probably do. Let's do something like this more so. Let's go Paul Reed here. Let's go Isaiah Stewart here. And then let's go Tim Hardaway Jr. Maybe that makes you guys feel a little better. I actually feel a little bit better about that. I've kind of been talking myself into playing him. And plus, if they're going to trade him, they might as well play him, right? I feel like that's probably the best way to do it. So, okay, I feel a little bit better about this, right? I feel a little bit better about this. And this also leads you to some sort of dynamic where you're not going to have still spacing if Beef Stew's playing center for you at times because people still probably won't necessarily guard him. But if he can just knock down a couple of them, it helps. So I feel pretty good about this. And I know we kind of already took a look at some of the lineups and what was working, and we kind of already found the correlation. What is this Caitlin Clark thing? Get that out of here. That was weird as shit. But a lot of these rotations were just like extremely negative and extremely negative. Like what's one with substantial minutes that just didn't work out? We've got Cunningham, Ivy, Beef Stew, Sasser, Duren. Is that what they started the season with last year? Could be, and that makes sense because they lost a lot of games, and I mean a lot of games. But yeah, some of these rotations just didn't quite make sense, especially the Killian Hayes ones. I really can't believe he got another NBA contract, but hey, people see stuff in people. What are you going to do? So that's what I'm thinking for rotations. Where do we see these guys in the standings? They were in last place last year. Where do we see them this year? So we've got a couple teams on the board already here, especially in the East. We've got some of the top teams figured out. We just had the Bulls who... Man, that hurts. It just hurts. So, drum roll, please. Bum, 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 bum. Where do we see the Pistons? Click this button. I got them as 13. So, they've moved up 2 spots from 15. I got them at 13. This team's probably still not going to be very good, y'all. It's still probably not. But there's a lot of room to do some interesting things. They just need to do it. And I'm so scared that they're not going to do it because Detroit typically doesn't. But regardless, I got him as a 13. That's an improvement. Hopefully they can win more so like 20, 30 games as opposed to 14, which is abysmal. Just start to be a little more competitive, start to be a little bit better, like so we can actually be growing, right? Like let's see Cade Cunningham have a really good season where we're like, wow, that guy's a good basketball player. Think early Devin Booker on those Suns teams. We're like, well, that guy's good. His team sucks or something like that, but he's good. Can we get that going? And can we find one other young guy that really looks promising then? I think that'd be a good season. Sorry, Pistons fans. I do hope it goes better for you. I really do. You've suffered long enough, but that's where I got it. But I'll leave this up to you guys now for the rest of it. You let me know. What are you seeing for the Pistons this year? What are you excited about? What moves do you want to see them do? Know that I've got these videos coming out Monday, Wednesday, Friday up until the start of like preseason. So I'm going to be keeping you guys filled with basketball content, even though the views aren't like crazy necessarily right now. So please help me out. Like, subscribe, and comment. Share it with your friends. Do whatever you got to do. Anybody that's watching these videos at this point, you're probably a basketball sweat. So congratulations. But seriously, let me know your comments down below, and we'll see you guys later. Thanks so much. Bye.